Today we're going to be looking at converting customary units. Customary units are things that we use here in the United States. Almost any other place you go in the entire world, they use metric units, which we'll be looking at later. So what we're going to be looking at here is how we can use ratios to convert customary units of measure. If we look at example 1, the sidewalk in front of a store is 4.5 feet wide. The city regulations establish the maximum width for sidewalks of 66 inches. Does the sidewalk meet the city regulations? Okay, so you can see here are some conversions in the customary system that you guys are probably familiar with some of these. At least 1 foot is 12 inches. Yard is 3 feet or 36 inches. 1 mile is 5,280 feet or 1,760 yards. So if we look at this, one way we can do this is that we can change. We've got 12 inches is equal to 1 foot. And so we could figure out how many inches we have in 4.5 feet. So basically what we do here, we start out with this. 12 inches equals 1 foot. And then if we multiply both of those, numerator and denominator, by 4.5, then that will give us two things that are equivalent also. Another way of doing this would be to do a proportion we've talked about. We could say 12 inches for 1 foot, and we want to find how many inches for 4.5 feet would be another option. In that case, we could say, going this direction, that would be multiplying by 4.5. So 12 times 4.5. And just like they did up above, we would get 54 inches. So 4.5 feet is equal to 54 inches, and so they have their sidewalk is 66 inches, and so the maximum width is 66 inches, ours is 54 inches, and so we are within the regulations. I'm not sure why they have a maximum width. To me, a minimum width for a sidewalk would make sense. I'm not sure of the reasoning of a maximum width, but anyway. So that would be an option there. Another way of doing this is what they might refer to as dimensional analysis. It's converting measures by including measurement units when we multiply. So we have 4.5 feet, and we're trying to change that into inches. What we can do is multiply by what's called a conversion factor. Conversion factor is just two things that are equal to each other. In this case, 12 inches is equal to 1 foot. So what we can do is, just like when we multiply and we can reduce like factors when we're multiplying fractions, we can actually cancel units out when we multiply fractions. So in this case, we want to get rid of the feet, we want to change it to inches. So the feet in the first fraction would be in the numerator, the second fraction we put it in the denominator, then you can see those will cancel out. And then we'll just be taking 4.5 times 12, which gives us 54 inches. Okay, so essentially, in a way, we talked about really 3 different ways that you guys can do those problems. And again, it's up to you. Whichever way you would like to do those is fine. So if we look at the try it, according to city regulations, how many feet wide is the maximum sidewalk width? Okay, so they told us in inches, so 66 inches. And we're trying to figure out how many feet that's equal to. Okay, so 66 inches. Okay, so we're trying to find how many feet that is. So if you want to put a variable there, whatever letter you want to use, if you want to do F for feet, that would make sense probably. And then if we're doing a ratio, which is one of the three options we talked about, what we would do is put a fraction here, and we want our units to be across from each other, our same units to be across from each other. So we would want inches to be on the numerator and feet to be in the denominator. Okay, and what's one of our conversions between inches and feet is that what? 1 foot is equal to 12 inches. Good. Okay, so what we can do from this is we can figure out then how many feet that's going to be. We've talked about looking for patterns. Certainly if you had a calculator, it would be no problem to take 66 divided by 12, figure out what the pattern is. You know, how would you multiply 12? What would you multiply 12 by to get to 66? If you didn't have a calculator, that would be a little bit more of a challenge maybe. Remember, our patterns can be multiplying or dividing, going across or up and down. I like to deal with 1 if possible, because 1 is really easy to work with when we're dealing with multiplying or dividing. Okay, what you have to do, remember, is go towards the variable. So that would be going this direction. So multiplying or dividing, how do we get from 12 to 1? Divide by 12. Good. So what that means is if we take 66 divided by 12, that will tell us how many feet we have. Okay? Some of you guys might have been able to just look at the problem and you said, well, I know we're going to do 66 divided by 12. Okay? The deal is always, you know, it is going to be either multiplying by 12 or dividing by 12. The key is just figuring out which one you need to do. So if you're able to figure that out otherwise, that's okay. But if you have any troubles with that at all, I highly recommend doing, like we did here, a proportion or one of those 3 ways that we talked about in order to figure this out. If you divide that out, 12 would go into 66 5 times, which would be 60. And then that would be 6 left. So that's 6 left out of 12. So 5 and 6/12, which is the same as 5 1/2. If you did that on the calculator, obviously it would give you 5 5/10, 5.5, and that means the same thing. Okay, so 5 1/2 feet would be the maximum sidewalk width. The next thing we're going to talk about is with capacity in the customary system. Capacity has to do with liquids. So different ways with this. I've seen this before with just this picture. Okay, not with the castle behind it, but just this picture that helps us visualize how gallons, quarts, pints, and cups are related. So from the picture, you know, G is for gallon. So within the gallon, you can see 4 Q's, so 4 quarts in a gallon. Within each Q, there's 2 P's, so that means 2 pints in a quart. Within each P, there are 2 C's, which means 2 cups in a pint. Okay, so this drawing, so this drawing can help you to kind of visualize that relationship. I just saw this recently. Another teacher was using this with their class. So here's a little story you can use that kind of can help you remember this also. There once was a gallon castle. In the castle there lived 4 queens. Each queen had a prince and a princess. Each prince and princess had 2 cats. How many cats lived in the castle? Okay, and so again, just kind of visualizing that. There's even just a slight variation of this. It's king gallon or something like that. Anyway, but this can help you guys visualize, and with the story, if that helps you to remember that relationship between those things. Obviously, you know, generally we have a conversion sheet, but if you didn't just have a conversion sheet, you know, you were in the real world and not in math class somewhere, you may not always have a reference sheet in your pocket that you can just pull out and refer to at any moment's notice. So if we look at example 2, Jonah has 15 gallons of water for a camping trip. How many quarts of water does he have? Okay, so from this, you know, we've got our conversions here we can look at. And so we know there are 4 quarts in a gallon. So one option would be, if we have 15 gallons, quarts are smaller. And literally from our picture, the Q is smaller than the G, right? So quarts are smaller, so there's going to be more quarts than there are gallons because they're smaller units of measure. So one way to do this then would just be to simply multiply 15 times 4 and you would get 60 quarts. What the book does here, they just start out with that, you know, 4 quarts is 1 gallon, and then they say, well, we're trying to get to 15 gallons. So we have 1 gallon, we're trying to get to 15. And basically what they're doing here really is a proportion. Okay, they're really just doing a proportion. It's just that instead of an X on top there, they actually worked it out and got the number. Alright, so that would be 60 quarts of water for 15 gallons. Another way of doing it here, the dimensional analysis, you can say I have 15 gallons, so that's like 15 gallons over 1. And then I want to get rid of the gallons, I want to have quarts. So gallons would have to go in the denominator. This is our conversion, but the gallons would have to go in the denominator for the gallons to cancel out. And then you could do 15 times 4, which would be 60. Okay? And again, with that conversion factor, you know it's either going to be multiplying by 4 or dividing by 4. That's the only question, is which one do I do? So sometimes, you know, doing a proportion or doing this dimensional analysis might help to clarify that for you, which that you need to do. So if we look at the try it, Brandon is making bread. His recipe says to use 2.5 tablespoons of sugar. How many teaspoons of sugar should he use? Okay, so this is, you know, kind of a real life type situation. All right, so maybe we're looking in the drawer and we can't find a tablespoon, or the tablespoon measuring devices are all dirty. So we have to use teaspoons. So the question is, how many do we need? So if we go back to our conversion chart there, we've got that 1 tablespoon is equal to 3 teaspoons. And this is something kind of unfortunate. I don't know why tablespoon and teaspoons, why they chose things so similar to each other, because it is such a confusion sometimes when you try and make a recipe and you accidentally do the wrong thing. Okay? But anyway, we can't really change that, so we'll just have to deal with it. A lot of times you do see a capital T for tablespoons is one distinction that you might look for. So if 1 tablespoon is equal to 3 teaspoons, I kind of like the proportions for stuff like this. So we've got 2.5 tablespoons. So we'll get our units, same units across from each other, and we're trying to figure out how many teaspoons that is. Well, I've got my good friend 1 here that makes my life really easy to find patterns. So we can see this one, if we're going from 1 tablespoon to 2.5, to get from 1 to 2.5 would be multiplying by 2.5. Okay? So that means we will take 3 times 2.5. Okay? If you had a calculator to use, you could take 3 times 2.5. If you did not have one, remember, we would be multiplying 3 times 2.5. We could put 3 as 3 over 1. The 2.5 we would have to change to an improper fraction. So 2 times 2 is 4, plus the 1 on top would be 5 halves. And you multiply, so 3 times 5 is 15, 1 times 2 is 2, and then 15 halves is an improper fraction, so then you can divide that out, and that goes in 7 times with 1 left, so that would be 7.5 teaspoons. And again, I know that's much quicker to do on your calculator, just realistically we don't always have one, or we're not always allowed to use one, so that would be the way you'd have to do it by hand otherwise. Example 3. The alpine pika is a small mammal in the rabbit family. How much does the alpine pika weigh in pounds? So you can see on the scale here it is weighing in at 10 ounces. So 10 ounces, that is less than a pound because a pound is 16 ounces. So one way would be to do a proportion here. Actually, I do a little bit different than the book. What they did is fine. Let me just mention to you how I might do this. I might start out with the conversion. 1 pound is 16 ounces is the conversion that we've been given. And we have 10 ounces. And we're trying to find out how many pounds that is. Okay. So on this one, again, I've got a 1 there. Going across, maybe not as nice going from 16 to 10, but I can go up and down here. If I go from 16 to 1 would be doing what? Dividing by 16. So over on the other side then, we could divide that by 16. So if we do 10 divided by 16, well, one way of doing it, 10 divided by 16, you could just write that as a fraction, 10/16, and then you can reduce that to 5/8. So that's 5/8 of a pound. The other option you could do, what the book's doing, is they did a decimal. Okay, the fraction's going to be easier for you. Decimals, you never know when they're going to end. So I would suggest doing it that way, just 5/8 of a pound, and you're done. If you look at the try it, how many pounds does the elephant weigh? And so you can see the elephant is approximately 3.3 tons. And we're trying to figure out the pounds. So we need to work with our conversion here. We've got 1 ton is 2,000 pounds. And if we get our same units across from each other, this is 3.3 tons, and we're trying to figure out how many pounds that is. Okay, so this would be a proportion that we could work with here. Again, we can try to look for a pattern. This one happens to have a nice pattern going across. 1 times 3.3 is 3.3. And so then we can just multiply 2,000 times 3.3, which is 6,600. So about 6,600 pounds would be the weight of the elephant. So this gives you an idea of how to convert customary units.